The day begins in a bustling market, where the daily grind hides abuses no one dares to question anymore. A frail old woman collapses under the weight of 200 pounds, while guilty eyes avoid confronting the cruelty. But a millionaire, unassuming in appearance, breaks the cycle with a gesture that shatters the collective silence. What no one could have imagined was that this man was the woman's long-lost son, and that his arrival would change everything. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. Dawn broke slowly over Philadelphia, painting the skyline orange as it reflected off the Schuylkill River. At the Keystone Terminal Market, the first rays of sun still vied for space with the yellowish lamps hanging from the high ceiling, illuminating narrow aisles where the smell of ripe fruit mingled with the strong aroma of freshly brewed coffee. It was a place of intense life, where voices crossed in hurried negotiations, where handcarts creaked over the worn floor, and where every morning brought the promise of another day's struggle. That market was the beating heart of the neighborhood. Entire generations had grown up among those stalls, learning the trade of buying and selling, of haggling and surviving. The exposed brick walls held decades of stories, marks from old floods, scratches from pocket knives with the names of lovers, graffiti for sports teams. In the main aisle, the stalls were squeezed side by side, offering a little of everything: fresh vegetables picked before dawn, artisanal cheeses wrapped in white cloth, live chickens clucking in wooden crates, spices that perfumed the air with promises of hearty dinners. Irene knew this floor well. Her bare feet, protected only by old sandals that no longer fit right, had walked it for over 3 decades. She had come to the market as a young woman, pregnant with her first child, looking for honest work to support the baby on the way. Back then, her arms were strong, her legs steady, and she carried crates without complaint, proud of every cent earned by the sweat of her brow. But the years had been cruel. Life had taken its toll in every wrinkle, every aching joint, every sleepless night. But that morning, at 68 years old, her body seemed to weigh more than ever. Her trembling hands gripped the strap of a 200-pound sack of potatoes, and her knees, swollen with untreated arthritis, threatened to give out at any moment. She took a deep breath, trying to find strength where there was none left, and pulled the weight with all the determination she still held inside. The sack barely lifted off the ground. Irene felt a sharp pain shoot up her spine, so intense that an involuntary groan escaped her lips. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't refuse the work. Her grandchildren, Leo and Mia, were waiting at home, and the refrigerator was almost empty. The month's money had run out last week, and the few dollars that Celia Vance, the market owner, offered were the difference between eating and going to bed hungry. Celia was a woman of imposing presence. Tall, with broad shoulders, she ruled over that space as if it were her personal empire. Her voice echoed through the aisles with an authority no one dared to challenge. Everyone knew that crossing Celia Vance meant losing your livelihood, being cast out from the territory where so many depended on scraps to survive. She wasn't just strict, she was cruel with a terrifying naturalness, as if the suffering of others was a necessary part of the order of things. That morning, Celia watched Irene with her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. She knew the old woman couldn't carry the weight alone. She knew, and she didn't care. On the contrary, there was something in her gaze that bordered on pleasure, a dark satisfaction in seeing just how far someone's desperation could go. Irene tried to lift the sack again. Her arms trembled, her muscles screamed in protest, but she didn't give up. She couldn't give up. Around her, merchants and vendors averted their gaze, pretending not to see, too busy with their own worries. Some felt shame, others fear, but no one moved. Injustice here had become part of the landscape, invisible from being so often repeated. That's when Irene's left knee finally gave out. She fell to the side, and the sack toppled with a dull thud, spilling potatoes across the floor. The pain was immediate, sharp, radiating from her kneecap to her thigh. Irene bit her lip to hold back a cry, but the tears came anyway, hot and silent, streaming down her wrinkled face as she tried to get back up. They weren't just tears of physical pain. It was the humiliation of being there, fallen on the dirty floor, exposed before so many eyes. It was the frustration of a body that no longer obeyed as it once did, of a strength that had been depleted decade after decade without ever having time to recover. It was the deep fear that if she couldn't get up, if she couldn't finish this job, her grandchildren would go to bed hungry once again. And that, more than any pain, was unbearable. Celia approached with firm steps, her heels clicking on the floor like her death sentence. She looked down at the fallen old woman, at the scattered potatoes, at the vendors who were now watching with poorly disguised discomfort. Her voice cut through the air. "You can't even carry potatoes, you useless old woman. Pick them all up now, and if you bruise any, I'm docking your pay." The words fell on Irene like stones. She lowered her head, ashamed, humiliated in front of everyone, and began to gather the potatoes one by one, ignoring the pain in her knees, ignoring the tears that insisted on falling. She was used to it. She had learned over so many years that protesting only brought more suffering, that silent acceptance was the only way to survive. It was at that moment that a different presence moved through the aisle. The steps were firm, but unhurried. There was no excessive noise, no fanfare, just an energy that changed the air around it. A few vendors raised their heads, curious. Celia sensed it before she saw it. There was someone here who didn't belong, someone who carried a quiet authority, different from her own. Ryan Miller wore dark jeans and a simple white linen shirt with no visible brands. Nothing about him screamed wealth, but everything suggested control. His brown eyes scanned the market attentively, observing every detail, every movement. He was there on business, visiting regional suppliers for a new line of organic products his corporate group planned to launch. Ryan had always enjoyed these kinds of visits. Far from air-conditioned offices and endless meetings, he preferred to be on the factory floor, in the warehouses, in the markets, seeing up close how things really worked. He had learned from his adoptive father that a true businessman doesn't command from a distance, but knows every gear of his operation. And although Ryan had built a respectable empire, he had never lost the habit of getting his hands dirty when necessary. But what he saw that morning made him stop in his tracks. An elderly woman, kneeling on the floor, picking up potatoes while crying silently. Another woman standing, watching coldly, dozens of people around them, all mute, all complicit in their silence. Something inside Ryan churned. It wasn't just indignation. It was something deeper, a visceral revulsion he couldn't explain. He felt as if the scene touched an old wound, a hidden place inside him that rarely surfaced. Without a second thought, Ryan knelt beside Irene. He picked up a few potatoes from the floor and put them back in the sack. The old woman looked up, surprised, and met the face of a young man, maybe in his early 30s, who looked at her with a kindness she no longer expected to find anywhere. "Mom, are you hurt?" he said, his voice low but firm. "You shouldn't be carrying this alone." Irene tried to smile, but it was a sad, tired smile. "It's okay, son. I'm used to it. I have to work. I've got grandkids to raise." Ryan felt his chest tighten. Used to it. The words echoed inside him with a profound sadness. No one should get used to this. He looked up and met Celia's gaze, who was now staring at him with a mix of irritation and suspicion. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice harsh. "Mind your own business." Ryan stood up slowly, carefully helping Irene to her feet. He didn't answer immediately. He just held Celia's gaze, and in that silence there was a strength she didn't expect to find. "My name is Ryan Miller, and I think this is my business." Celia narrowed her eyes. The name wasn't completely unfamiliar, but she couldn't place it. Ryan noticed her hesitation and continued, his voice calm but laced with authority. "I'm the president of the Miller Foods Group. Maybe you've heard of us. We supply a large portion of the markets in Pennsylvania, and I'm here today evaluating new business partners." Celia's face paled slightly. The Miller Group was a powerhouse in the region. Everyone knew it. And if this man was really who he said he was, she had just made a huge mistake by treating him with disrespect. But Celia wasn't the type to back down easily. She crossed her arms, trying to regain control. "This is an internal matter, Mr. Miller. The old woman works here because she wants to. Nobody's forcing her." Ryan took a step forward, and his voice, though still controlled, gained a steely edge. "Nobody's forcing her. She can barely stand. She's hurt. And you humiliate her in public while everyone watches. This isn't work. It's exploitation." The silence that followed was thick. Vendors stopped what they were doing. Some moved closer discreetly, curious, while others backed away, afraid of getting involved. Celia felt everyone's eyes on her, and for the first time in many years she felt her power waver. Irene, meanwhile, was panicking. She tugged lightly on Ryan's sleeve, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, you don't have to get involved. I'm fine, really. I don't want any trouble. Miss Celia could fire me, and then I'll have nothing." Ryan looked at her, and what he saw in those tired eyes broke his heart. Fear, resignation. A woman who had learned to accept the unacceptable because the alternative was even worse. He gently touched her shoulder. "You're not going to lose anything, I promise, and no one is going to hurt you." Celia let out a harsh laugh, trying to regain control. "You have no authority here, Mr. Miller. This market is mine. I call the shots however I see fit." Ryan faced her, and his voice came out low, but every word was a direct hit. "Then maybe it's time someone reviewed how you call the shots. I'm going to request a full inspection of this establishment, working conditions, safety, contracts, everything. And if I find out this is standard practice, that other people are treated like this, I guarantee that license of yours won't last very long." Celia's face hardened into a mask of contained rage. She knew he wasn't bluffing. A man like Ryan Miller had influence, resources, connections. He could cause serious problems. But Celia wasn't going to give in without a fight. "This is harassment," she said, raising her voice for everyone to hear. "This man shows up out of nowhere, sticks his nose where it doesn't belong, and now he wants to shut down my honest business." "Honest?" Ryan repeated, his voice laced with bitter irony. "Look around, Ms. Vance. See the fear in everyone's eyes. Here, this isn't honesty, it's tyranny." Irene, frightened, tried to pull away, but Ryan held her hand gently. "You don't have to carry this weight alone anymore. I'll make sure you get help." Irene shook her head, tears streaming down her face again. "You don't understand. I need the money. I have 2 grandkids at home. They depend on me. If I don't work, they'll go hungry." Ryan felt something shift deep inside him. Those words struck a sensitive chord he didn't know he had. Grandkids, responsibility, survival. Suddenly he was no longer just seeing an exploited elderly woman. He was seeing an entire history of pain, of sacrifice, of a lifetime spent carrying burdens she should never have had to carry alone. "How old are your grandkids?" he asked softly. "Leo is 15. Mia is 12, Irene replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I've been taking care of them since their mother passed. They're all I have." Ryan nodded, and a new determination took hold of him. "I'm going to help you. Not with charity, but with dignity. I'll arrange for a fair job, with decent pay, and make sure your grandkids have what they need." Celia snorted in disbelief. "What kind of fairy tale is this? You barely know this woman and you're already playing the hero?" Ryan turned to her, his gaze as hard as granite. "I'm not playing the hero. I'm doing what any decent person would do. And if you can't understand that, then you really shouldn't be in charge of anything." The tension was palpable. Vendors whispered among themselves. Some silently supported Ryan, others feared the consequences. Celia knew she had lost ground, but she wasn't going to accept it passively. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You don't know who you're messing with." Ryan gave a humorless half-smile. "Actually, I think it's you who doesn't know. See you soon, Ms. Vance." He turned, helping Irene walk out of the market. She was trembling, still in shock from everything that had happened. Part of her couldn't believe it was real. No one had ever stood up for her like that. No one had ever confronted Celia Vance on her behalf. As they walked through the aisles, Ryan felt a strange feeling growing inside him, an unease he couldn't name. He looked at the frail woman beside him, at her calloused hands, at the face marked by time and suffering, and felt as if he were looking at something familiar, as if in some inexplicable way that pain wasn't just hers. It was an absurd feeling, he knew. He had just met this woman. There was no logical reason to feel so deeply connected to her situation. But the truth was, Ryan had grown up with a constant sense of displacement, a quiet restlessness that never completely disappeared. His adoptive parents, Anthony and Martha Miller, had given him everything. Education at the best schools, trips abroad, a bright future. But there was always a missing piece in the puzzle of his own life, an unanswered question that hung over his existence. Who was he really? Where had he come from? Why, even surrounded by luxury and opportunity, did he feel that strange emptiness, that chill that no blanket could warm? But he couldn't understand why. Irene's house was on a narrow alley in Kensington, where the peeling walls and uneven sidewalks told the story of a place forgotten by progress. It was a simple structure, 3 cramped rooms with a tin roof that got too hot in the summer and let the cold in without mercy in the winter. The walls were exposed brick, never plastered for lack of money, and the iron gate had an old rust that no paint could hide anymore. But it was there that Irene had built her home, where she had raised children and was now raising grandchildren, where every corner held memories of a lifetime of struggle and resilience. Those walls had heard cries in the middle of the night, children's laughter, prayers whispered in moments of desperation. Ryan insisted on taking her home that morning. Irene tried to refuse, ashamed to show her poverty to a man like him, but Ryan wouldn't take no for an answer. He called his driver, Anderson, a middle-aged man who had worked with the Miller family for years, and asked him to drive carefully to the address Irene reluctantly provided. During the ride, Irene kept her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the window, as if she couldn't believe she was there, inside that luxurious car, being treated with a kindness that seemed to belong to a different world than hers. Ryan watched her profile in silence, noticing every detail of her weathered face, every deep wrinkle that drew a map of accumulated suffering. There was something about this woman that touched him in an inexplicable way. It wasn't just compassion. It was something more visceral, deeper, as if he were looking at a part of himself he had never known. The feeling bothered him because it made no sense. He had grown up with a silver spoon, had never known hardship, had never known hunger or abandonment. So why did he feel so strangely connected to her pain? When they reached the alley, Anderson parked the car with difficulty in the tight space. Ryan got out first and offered his hand to help Irene. She accepted, still shy, and walked slowly to the worn wooden door of her house. Before she could open it, the door flew open. 2 teenagers appeared in the doorway, their eyes wide with surprise to see their grandmother arriving in a car like that. "Grandma," the taller boy exclaimed, concern evident in his voice. "What happened? Are you hurt?" It was Leo, 15, thin but tall for his age, with messy curly hair and a sharp gaze that revealed someone who had learned early on to read the world around him. Beside him, Mia, 12, held her brother's hand, her large eyes fixed on her grandmother and the stranger accompanying her. "Everything's fine, my loves," Irene said, her voice tired. "I just had a little trouble at the market, but this gentleman here helped me." Ryan stepped forward, offering a gentle smile. "My name is Ryan. Your grandmother took a fall, but she's okay. I just wanted to make sure she got home safely." Leo looked from Ryan to his grandmother, suspicious. His protective instincts kicked in. He knew this neighborhood, knew the dangers, knew how cruel or fake people could be, and a rich man showing up out of nowhere to help his grandmother didn't sit right. "Thanks for bringing her," he said, his voice restrained. "We'll take care of her from here." Ryan nodded, respecting the boy's distrust. It was understandable. But before he left, he took a business card from his pocket and handed it to Leo. "If you need anything, call me. I'm serious." Leo took the card, read the printed name, and his eyes widened. Miller Foods Group. He had seen that name on trucks around the city, in TV commercials. It was a huge company, and the owner was here on his doorstep offering help. Ryan noticed the change in the boy's expression. "I know it seems strange," he said, his voice sincere, "but what I saw at the market today wasn't right, and I genuinely want to help. Your grandmother shouldn't be killing herself working like that. She deserves dignity, rest." Mia, who had been silent until then, took a step forward. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Do you promise you won't hurt Grandma? Because a lot of people have promised to help and only made things worse. Ryan knelt to be at the girl's level, looking directly into her eyes. "I promise I won't let anything bad happen to her or to you." There was so much sincerity in his gaze that even Leo, with all his natural suspicion, felt something loosen inside him. Maybe this man really was different. Irene, leaning against the doorframe, watched the scene with a heavy heart. She saw something in Ryan's eyes she couldn't name, a tenderness that seemed to go beyond simple kindness. And when he looked at her grandchildren, there was a light in his eyes that confused her. It was as if he were seeing something beyond what was in front of him, as if he were searching for something he didn't even know he was looking for. Ryan said goodbye with a wave and returned to the car. Anderson was already at the wheel, waiting. Before getting in, Ryan looked one last time at the humble house, at the family he barely knew but who already occupied a strange space in his heart. Back at the office, Ryan couldn't focus on his scheduled meetings. His mind kept returning to the market, to Irene, to those two teenagers who looked at the world with a mix of hope and distrust. He cancelled his afternoon agenda and called Patricia Adams, his trusted lawyer and longtime friend. Patricia was a sharp, competent woman in her 40s who had helped Ryan build the legal fortress that protected his businesses. She walked into his office with firm steps, carrying her leather briefcase and a curious expression. "What's up, Ryan? You sounded strange on the phone." Ryan told her everything. The market, Celia Vance, Irene, the fall, the public humiliation, the meeting with the grandchildren. He talked about the strange feeling that had taken hold of him, about how he couldn't stop thinking about the situation. Patricia listened in silence, taking mental notes. When Ryan finished, she sighed and crossed her arms. "You want me to investigate," she said. It wasn't a question. "I do," Ryan confirmed. "I want to know everything about that market, working conditions, licenses, previous complaints, everything. And I want information on Celia Vance, who she is, where she came from, how she got that space. Something tells me there's a lot more behind that facade." Patricia nodded. "I'll put my team on it today. But Ryan," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Why are you so involved in this? Don't get me wrong, it's noble of you to want to help. But I've known you for years, and I've never seen you so personally invested in something like this." Ryan was silent for a moment. He didn't know how to answer that question himself. How could he explain a feeling that defied logic? How could he put into words the deep unease he felt whenever he thought of that elderly woman, those vulnerable grandchildren, that silent injustice that happened every day without anyone doing anything? "I don't know, Pat," he finally admitted. "I just know I have to do this. Something inside me is telling me it's important, more important than I can understand right now." Patricia studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll start the investigation. I'll keep you posted." Meanwhile, back at the market, Celia Vance was furious. The humiliation of that morning burned like a fire inside her. Who did that smug businessman think he was, showing up and challenging her in front of everyone? She had built her empire with her bare hands, had fought for every inch of that space, and she wasn't going to let anyone threaten her authority. She summoned two of her trusted men, Sergio and Walter, vendors who owed her favors, and turned a blind eye to her practices in exchange for prime spots in the market. "I want you to keep an eye on that old woman," Celia ordered, her voice low but firm. "If she comes back here, I want to know, and if that Ryan Miller shows up again, let me know immediately. Nobody makes a fool of me and gets away with it." Sergio exchanged a look with Walter. They both knew Celia was capable of terrible things when she felt threatened, but they also knew that messing with a businessman of Ryan Miller's stature could bring bigger problems than Celia imagined. Still, they nodded. They had no choice. That evening, at the Miller residence, Ryan had dinner with his parents in a heavy silence. Anthony Miller, a man with graying hair and a rigid posture, watched his son with concern. Martha, his wife, an elegant middle-aged woman, pushed food around her plate without eating, sensing the tension in the air. "You're too quiet, son," Anthony finally said. "Did something happen?" Ryan looked up from his plate. For a moment, he considered telling them what had happened at the market, but something held him back. an inner voice that whispered caution, that told him to wait, to understand the situation better before involving his parents. "Just tired, Dad. A lot of meetings today." Anthony didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press. Martha, however, studied her son's face with that unfailing maternal intuition. She knew Ryan better than anyone, had raised him since he was a baby, had seen every phase of his life, and she knew when something was bothering him. Later, after Ryan had retired to his room, Martha entered quietly, carrying a cup of chamomile tea just as she had since he was a child. "Brought you your tea," she said softly. Ryan smiled, accepting the cup. "Thanks, Mum." Martha sat on the edge of the bed, watching her son. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Ryan held the cup between his hands, feeling the warmth spread through his fingers. "Mum," he began, hesitating, "you and Dad have always been honest with me about my adoption. You always knew I needed to know the truth, even if it wasn't easy." Martha tensed. "Always," she confirmed, her voice careful. "Why are you asking this now?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. He stared at the tea, seeing his distorted reflection on the dark surface of the liquid. "Do you have any information about my biological mother? Anything at all?" Martha felt her heart clench. It was a conversation she had dreaded for years, knowing it would one day come. Ryan was very small when he came to them, just a few weeks old, brought through an adoption process that, at the time, hadn't been as transparent as it should have been. "Son," she said, her voice trembling, "you know the information was very limited back then. We only know that you were given up by a woman who couldn't afford to raise a baby. The hospital handled everything, and we received you as a gift from God. But you never met her, never had any contact. No, everything was done through third parties. We were told it was for the best, to protect everyone involved." Ryan nodded slowly, but a restlessness grew inside him. Those words, "to protect everyone involved," sounded empty. Who was being protected? And from what? He didn't say any of this to his mother. He just took a sip of tea and changed the subject. But that night, when he finally lay down, Ryan couldn't sleep. His mind raced in circles, always returning to the same point. Irene, her tired eyes, her trembling hands, and that persistent feeling that there was something profoundly important that he still couldn't see. The next morning, Patricia called early. "Ryan, you need to come to the office. We've started the investigation and found some very interesting things about the market and Celia Vance." Ryan left the house before even having breakfast, driving at high speed to the Miller Group's central office. When he arrived, Patricia was already in the conference room with documents spread across the table and a serious expression on her face. "What did you find, Pat?" Patricia took a deep breath. "Celia Vance took over the administration of that market 12 years ago through a suspicious transaction. The previous owner, an elderly man, transferred everything to her shortly before he died, claiming she was a distant niece, but there are no family records to prove that relationship." Ryan approached the table, examining the documents. "Go on." "Furthermore, there are at least 15 complaints on file about inadequate working conditions, employee exploitation, and tax irregularities. All of them were either buried or ignored. Someone is protecting her, Ryan. Someone with influence." Ryan felt anger rising within him. "And what about Irene? Did you find anything on her?" Patricia hesitated. "I'm looking into it, but so far I only have the basics. Irene Santos, 68, widow, raising 2 grandchildren. But there's something strange in her old records. There's a gap, a period of a few months about 30 years ago, where there's no record of her anywhere. It's like she disappeared off the map." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. 30 years ago. He was exactly 32. The coincidence was too disturbing to ignore. "Keep digging," he said, his voice firm, but filled with an emotion he couldn't hide. "I want to know everything. Everything." Patricia nodded, but looked at her friend with concern. "Ryan, where is this going?" He didn't know how to answer, but something deep inside him whispered that he was about to discover a truth that would change everything. In the days that followed, Ryan found himself torn between his business commitments and a growing obsession with unraveling the mystery surrounding the Keystone Terminal market, and especially Irene. Every business meeting seemed endless, every financial report irrelevant in the face of this search for answers that consumed his thoughts day and night. He cancelled appointments, postponed important decisions, and delegated responsibilities he would normally handle himself. His subordinates whispered among themselves about the change in their boss's behavior, but no one dared to ask what was happening. Patricia worked tirelessly, mobilizing a team of private investigators and specialized lawyers to comb through every document, every record, every clue that could reveal the truth behind the story. She herself barely slept, spending entire nights in dusty archives, making calls to old contacts and pressuring reluctant public officials to open long-sealed drawers. The first major breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon, when Patricia walked into Ryan's office with a grave expression and a folder full of old documents. She closed the door behind her and sat down in front of him without waiting for an invitation. "You need to see this," she said, opening the folder and spreading yellowed papers across the desk. Ryan leaned forward, examining the documents. They were old hospital records, some with ink faded by time. "What is this?" "These are records from St. Teresa's Hospital, the hospital where Irene gave birth 32 years ago, Patricia explained, her voice carefully controlled. "I got them through a contact who worked there at the time. Ryan, that hospital was involved in something very dirty." Ryan felt his heart race. "What do you mean?" Patricia took a deep breath before continuing. Between the late 80s and the mid-90s, St. Teresa's Hospital was part of an illegal adoption ring. They would take babies from poor, vulnerable women, often single or homeless, and give these children to wealthy families through intermediaries. The mothers were told that the babies were stillborn or had serious health problems. Many never even saw the bodies. Ryan felt a cold chill run down his spine. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked up one of the documents. The room seemed to have gotten smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls were closing in around him. But that can't be true. How could something like that happen without anyone finding out? "They did find out eventually," Patricia said grimly. "There was an investigation in the late 90s, but it was covered up. Powerful people were involved. Local politicians, influential doctors, lawyers. The scandal was buried before it could fully come to light. The hospital changed administration, some employees were transferred, and everything was swept under the rug." "And how many families were destroyed in the process?" Ryan asked, his voice thick with an anger he could barely control. "How many mothers mourned children who never died? How many children grew up not knowing where they came from?" Patricia looked at him with deep sadness. "From the records we were able to access, there were at least 30 documented cases. But there could have been many more. Many files were intentionally burned or lost." Ryan leaned back in his chair, trying to process the information. "And Irene was at that hospital. Was she one of the victims?" Patricia nodded, sliding another document across the table. "This is her admission record. Irene Santos, 19 years old at the time, single, no close family. She was admitted in labor and was told 3 days later that the baby had severe complications and had not survived. No body was given to her, no death certificate was issued, nothing." Ryan picked up the paper with trembling hands. He read every word, every cold bureaucratic detail that summarized a devastating human tragedy. A young woman, alone, losing her child, without even being able to say goodbye, without being able to weep at a grave, without a place to leave her flowers or her tears. "Who was the doctor in charge?" he asked, his voice tense. Patricia pointed to a name on the document. "Dr. Arnold Peterson. He was the head of the maternity ward at the time. And guess who signed your adoption papers, Ryan?" Ryan closed his eyes. He didn't need her to say it. He already knew the answer before the words left her mouth. "The same doctor," he murmured. "The same doctor," Patricia confirmed, her voice heavy. "Dr. Arnold Peterson brokered your adoption, Ryan. He was the one who gave you to your parents, and according to the records, you were only 2 weeks old when it happened." The silence that followed was dense, suffocating. Ryan felt as if the floor was opening up beneath his feet, as if the entire reality he had known was shattering into unrecognizable pieces. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be that his whole life had been built on such a cruel, inhuman lie. Every childhood memory now took on a new meaning, a new color. The birthday parties, the expensive gifts, the family vacations, everything seemed tainted by a horrible truth he had never imagined. Did his parents know? Were they knowing accomplices or just victims of a corrupt system that sold babies like merchandise? "Are you saying I was stolen?" he said, his voice coming out hoarse. "That my biological mother didn't give me up voluntarily, but that I was torn from her?" Patricia leaned forward, gently touching his hand. "Ryan, I don't have all the proof yet. I need more time to confirm everything, but the coincidences are too big to ignore. The same hospital, the same doctor, the same time period, and Irene is exactly the right age to be your mother. She would have been a teenager when she got pregnant, which explains why she was alone and vulnerable." Ryan stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, Philadelphia stretched out under the afternoon sun, indifferent to the chaos he felt inside. How could he go on living as if nothing had changed? How could he look his adoptive parents in the eye and not feel anger, betrayal, pain? But there was also another emotion, more confusing, harder to name. If this was true, if Irene really was his mother, then he had a family he never knew existed. He had a mother who had suffered for him her entire life, who had carried that loss like an open wound that never healed. And he had a nephew and a niece, Leo and Mia, who were actually his half-siblings. "I need to be sure, Pat," he said, his back still to her. "I need concrete proof, a DNA test, something that leaves no doubt." Patricia nodded. "I was already thinking about that. But to do the test, you'll need a sample from her, and that means you'll have to tell her about your suspicions." Ryan closed his eyes. "No, not yet. I want to be sure first. I can't just show up in her life with a story like this without solid evidence. It would be too cruel. Then we'll have to get creative," Patricia said, "but I'll find a way." Meanwhile, in the humble house in Kensington, Irene spent her days in a state of restlessness she couldn't explain. Since that encounter with Ryan, something had changed within her. It was as if a door that had been closed for decades had creaked open, letting in a painful but necessary light. She found herself thinking about that young man, about his kind eyes, about the way he had looked at her and her grandchildren. There was something in his gaze that reminded her of something distant, something she had lost so long ago. She no longer knew if it was a real memory or just a recurring dream. Leo noticed the change in his grandmother. She spent more time sitting in the old rocking chair in the backyard, staring at the sky with a distant expression, as if she were talking to ghosts from the past. "Grandma, what's going on?" he asked one afternoon, sitting on the ground beside her. Irene smiled sadly, running a hand through her grandson's curly hair. "Just thinking about life, my boy, about so many things that have passed, so many things I've lost along the way." "You're thinking about that man, Ryan, aren't you?" Mia asked, appearing at the door with a glass of fresh water. Irene nodded slowly. "I can't explain it, my loves, but when I looked at him, I felt a strange thing in my chest, like I already knew him from somewhere, like he was important in a way I can't understand." Leo exchanged a look with his sister. They both knew their grandmother rarely spoke of the past, of the children she had lost, of the pain she carried in silence. But at that moment it seemed like something was stirring inside her, something old and deep that was asking to come to the surface. "Grandma," Leo said softly, "you never really told us about our uncle, your son who passed away when he was a baby." Irene closed her eyes and tears began to stream silently down her face. "I don't like to talk about it, my boy. It hurts too much." Mia knelt beside her grandmother, holding her hand. "We know, Grandma, but sometimes talking helps the pain not feel so heavy." Irene took a deep breath, trying to find the strength to put into words a pain she had held for over 3 decades. "He was so tiny when he was born. He fit in the palm of my hand. I was young, alone, scared. I had no one to help me. When I went into labor, a neighbor took me to the hospital, St. Teresa's. I was in so much pain, so scared, but I was also happy because I was going to meet my baby." She paused, swallowing the sob that threatened to break her voice. The memories came back with a painful clarity, as if they had happened yesterday and not over 3 decades ago. She still remembered the smell of the hospital, those cold green walls, the sound of metal carts rolling down the hallways. She remembered the pain of childbirth, the feeling of relief mixed with fear when she finally heard the baby's cry. It was a strong, healthy cry that had filled her heart with hope. But after he was born, they wouldn't let me see him properly. They said he had problems, that he needed to be in an incubator. I stayed in that hospital for 3 days begging to see my son, pleading, and on the 3rd day a nurse came and said he hadn't made it, that he had passed away during the night. The way they said it, Irene continued, her voice trembling, was so cold, so quick. Like they were getting a weight off their shoulders, like my baby was just another problem solved. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I was so young, so scared. And they were doctors, important people. Who would have believed me? Leo felt his chest tighten. And did they give you his body? Irene shook her head, the tears now falling freely. No. They said it wouldn't be good for me to see, that it would be better to remember him as he was. I begged, I screamed, but it was no use. They sent me away and I never heard anything about my boy again. I never got to bury him, never got to say goodbye. Mia was now crying along with her grandmother, holding her hand tightly. It's so unfair, Grandma. You didn't deserve to go through that. Irene wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Life isn't always fair, my dear. You learn that early when you're born poor. But I always carried my boy in my heart, always dreamed of him, always wondered what he would have been like if he had lived. Would he have had my eyes, my smile? Would he have been happy? Leo hugged his grandmother tightly. You were so brave, Grandma, and you still are. That same night, Ryan received a call from Patricia. She had managed to arrange a meeting with someone who could change everything. Ryan, you need to be here early tomorrow. I've located a former employee of St. Teresa's Hospital. She was a nurse in the maternity ward at the time Irene gave birth, and she's willing to talk. Ryan felt a mix of hope and fear. Does she know anything concrete? She says she knows a lot, and that she has documents she's kept, all these years, afraid they would be destroyed. Ryan, she seems genuinely remorseful and wants to do the right thing even after all this time. I've scheduled it for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Are you coming? Ryan didn't hesitate. I'll be there. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the office before the scheduled time. He was nervous, anxious, feeling as if he were about to step through a portal with no return. He had spent the entire night awake, reliving every moment of his childhood, every conversation with his parents, searching for signs he might have ignored. He had stared for hours at the only baby picture he had, that blurry image of him wrapped in a blanket, trying to find something that would confirm or deny his suspicions. He dressed carefully that morning, as if preparing for a battle. He didn't know what the meeting would reveal, but he knew his life would never be the same after that day. Patricia was already there, accompanied by a woman in her 60s, with grey hair tied in a bun and tired but determined eyes. There was a quiet dignity about her, an old sadness that seemed to have shaped every line on her face. Ryan, this is Brenda Sullivan. She worked at St. Teresa's Hospital for 15 years. Ryan shook her hand, noticing how it trembled slightly. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Sullivan. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. Brenda nodded, sitting down carefully. Look, son, I've carried this weight on my conscience for too long. I saw a lot of wrong things in that hospital, a lot of mothers suffering, a lot of children being taken away. And I never had the courage to report it because I was scared of losing my job, scared of retaliation. But now that I'm older, I don't want to die with these secrets. Ryan sat across from her, his hands clasped. Please, tell me everything. Brenda took a deep breath and began to speak, and with every word, Ryan's world crumbled a little more, revealing a truth that was both devastating and liberating. The next morning arrived heavy for Ryan. He had spent the night at Irene's house, talking until the early hours, filling in the gaps of a 32-year separation. Irene told him about her life, the hardships, the other children she had raised, the daughter who had passed away too soon, leaving Leo and Mia behind. Ryan, in turn, spoke of his privileged childhood, the constant feeling of not belonging, the emptiness that now finally made sense. But there was one conversation Ryan still needed to have, and it weighed on his chest like lead. He had to confront Anthony and Martha Miller. He had to look the people who raised him in the eye and demand the truth. He arrived at the Miller mansion shortly after 9 a.m. The house was imposing, with immaculate gardens and architecture that screamed old money. Ryan had grown up there, had run through those halls as a child, studied in that library, eaten at that table for thousands of nights. But at that moment, looking at the grand structure, he felt like a stranger. Martha was in the living room, sipping tea and reading the newspaper when Ryan walked in. She looked up and smiled, but the smile died when she saw the expression on her son's face. "Ryan, what happened? You look terrible. Where's Dad?" "In his office, answering emails." "Why? What's wrong?" Ryan didn't answer. He walked up the stairs with firm steps to Anthony's office. He knocked once on the door and entered without waiting for a reply. Anthony was sitting behind the mahogany desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose, typing on his computer. "Son, what a surprise. Didn't you have meetings today?" "Cancel everything you're doing," Ryan said, his voice hard. "We need to talk, you and Mom. Now." Anthony slowly took off his glasses, studying his son's face. There was something there he had never seen before, a mixture of anger, pain, and determination that unsettled him. He recognized that look because he himself had taught Ryan to maintain his composure even in the most difficult situations. But now that composure was cracked, revealing a storm of emotions underneath. "All right, let's go downstairs." The three of them gathered in the living room. Martha and Anthony sat side by side on the Italian leather sofa, the same sofa where Ryan had sat 1,000 times as a child, to talk about his day at school. But now everything felt different, as if he was seeing the place for the first time. Ryan remained standing, his arms crossed, looking at them with an intensity that made the air thick. "I found out the truth," Ryan began without preamble. "About my adoption, about where I came from, and about your role in all of it." Martha turned pale. "Ryan, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about St. Teresa's Hospital, the illegal adoption ring, the children stolen from vulnerable mothers and sold to wealthy families. I'm talking," he paused, controlling his emotion, "about my biological mother, who spent 32 years believing I was stillborn." The silence that followed was deafening. Anthony closed his eyes, and Martha brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "You knew," Ryan continued, his voice breaking. "You knew that adoption wasn't legal. You knew I had been stolen from someone." "It wasn't like that," Anthony said, his voice hoarse. "That's not what they told us." "Then tell me how it was," Ryan practically shouted. "Tell me the truth, at least now." Martha began to cry, and Anthony put his arm around her. When he started to speak, his voice was heavy with an old guilt that was finally surfacing. "We tried to have children for years, son. We tried treatments, procedures, everything, but nothing worked. And then an acquaintance told us about a possibility for a quick, discreet adoption. He said there were women who couldn't afford to raise their babies, who were willing to give them to families who could offer a better life." "And you believed that," Ryan said, his voice bitter. "You just believed that a mother would give up her child just like that." "We wanted to believe," Martha said through her tears. "We wanted a child so badly that we didn't ask enough questions. They told us everything was legal, that the papers were in order, that the biological mother had agreed. And when you arrived, so small, so perfect," she sobbed, "we couldn't think about anything but how much we loved you." Ryan felt tears burn his eyes but refused to let them fall. "She didn't agree. They told her I was stillborn. She looked for me for years, and you kept me from her all this time." "We didn't know," Anthony insisted, standing up. "You have to believe us, Ryan. If we had known the truth, we would have done something. We would have tried to fix it." "Would you have?" Ryan asked, his voice full of doubt. "Or would you have done exactly what you did? Ignore the questions, keep quiet, and move on as if nothing happened?" The blow landed. Anthony recoiled as if he had been physically struck. Martha was crying uncontrollably, and for the first time in his life, Ryan saw his parents not as authority figures, but as flawed people who had made terrible choices, driven by desperation and selfishness. "I met my mother," Ryan said, calmer now but no less firm. "She lives in poverty, exploited, working herself to the bone to care for my nephew and niece. Meanwhile, I grew up here in this mansion with everything money can buy, and she—" he swallowed hard. "She carried the pain of losing me all these years." Martha stood up, reaching for her son. "Please, Ryan, we love you. You're our son no matter what happened in the past." Ryan stepped back, refusing her touch. "I am her son. I always was, and you stole me from her." The words fell like a final sentence. Ryan walked out of the mansion without looking back, leaving Anthony and Martha in pieces in the living room, facing for the first time the consequences of choices they had made decades ago. In the afternoon, Ryan met with Brenda Sullivan at a bakery in Cherry Hill. The place was simple, with formica tables and uncomfortable chairs, but it had the comforting smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee. Brenda was sitting in a discreet corner, away from the windows, like someone who had learned to hide in the shadows. She was a small, frail woman with white hair, but her eyes still held the sharpness of someone who had seen too much in her life. When Ryan approached the table where she waited, Brenda studied him carefully, analyzing every detail of his face as if searching for something specific. "You're Ryan Miller," she said. It wasn't a question. "You have her eyes, Irene's." Ryan felt a tightness in his chest. "How do you know my mother?" Brenda gave a sad half-smile. "I was on duty the day you were born. I remember her, so young, so scared, but with incredible strength. She fought so hard during labor, and afterward, when they told her you had died, she screamed in a way I'll never forget. It was the scream of a broken soul." "I am. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me." Brenda motioned for him to sit. "I've waited a long time to tell this story. I've carried this guilt for years, but I was afraid. Afraid of retaliation, afraid of not being believed, afraid of destroying lives." "You can speak without fear now," Ryan said gently. "I need to know the truth. All of it." Brenda took a deep breath and began. "I worked as a nurse at St. Teresa's Hospital from 1988 to 2005. Around 1990, I started noticing strange things. Women would come in to give birth and leave without their babies, with vague stories about complications. But the babies," she paused, "the babies would disappear from the records. There were no proper death certificates, no bodies to mourn." Ryan felt anger rising inside him. "And you didn't say anything?" Brenda lowered her eyes, her shame evident. "I tried. I spoke to supervisors, questioned procedures, but I was threatened. They told me I'd lose my job, that I'd never work in another hospital again, that bad things could happen to my family. I had 3 kids to raise on my own, so I kept quiet, and I hated myself every day for it." Ryan reached across the table, lightly touching her arm. "You're doing the right thing now. Please continue." Brenda took an old folder from her bag. "Before I retired, I copied some records. I knew someone would need them one day. Here are the names of babies who disappeared, including—" She opened the folder and pointed to a specific line. "Yours." Ryan looked at the record. There it was, handwritten in a hurried script. "Male infant, born April 23, 1993. Mother Irene Santos. Disposition unknown." Celia Vance was the link between the mothers and the buyers, Brenda continued. She had connections with wealthy families, corrupt lawyers, even politicians. She facilitated everything. And she was paid very well for it. "How many children?" Ryan asked, his voice hoarse. "From the records I managed to copy, at least 37 over a 10-year period, but there were probably many more." Ryan closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of it. 37 stolen lives, 37 shattered mothers, 37 families that never knew each other. "Are you willing to testify? To make this public?" Brenda nodded, determination finally overcoming her fear. "I am. I'm too old to be afraid anymore, and those mothers deserve to know the truth." Ryan left that meeting with the folder of records and a renewed determination. He had proof, he had witnesses, he had everything he needed to expose the scheme and bring justice to all the victims. That night he gathered Patricia, Brenda, Irene, and even a few trusted journalists in his private office. It was time to go public. It was time to destroy the empire of lies that Celia Vance had built. In the following days, the story exploded in the media. Newspapers, television, social media, everyone was talking about the illegal adoption scandal at St. Teresa's Hospital. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation. The police issued search and seizure warrants, and Celia Vance, for the first time in her life, saw her protections crumble around her. The Keystone Terminal market was shut down for a full inspection. Workers were interviewed, documents seized, irregularities exposed. Celia tried to flee, but was intercepted at the airport, attempting to board a flight to the Bahamas with suitcases full of cash and fake documents. Her arrest was broadcast live, and Ryan watched from his office with Irene by his side. She held her son's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face as she watched the woman who had destroyed so many lives finally being held accountable. "This is for all the mothers," Ryan said softly. "For you, for the other 36, for all who suffered in silence." Irene nodded, unable to speak. The pain of 32 years wouldn't disappear with Celia's arrest, but at least now there was justice. There was acknowledgement of what had been stolen. There was hope that other families might be reunited, just as she and Ryan had been. Ryan spent the next few days taking care of his mother, his nephew, and his niece. He rented a comfortable house for them in Rittenhouse Square, enrolled Leo and Mia in good schools, and arranged for comprehensive medical care for Irene. But more than money and comfort, he gave them his presence. He had dinner with them every night, helped with homework, listened to their stories, and built memories they never had the chance to create. And slowly, painfully, with a lot of therapy and many difficult conversations, Ryan also began to rebuild his relationship with Anthony and Martha. It would never be the same. Trust had been broken, and such scars don't fade completely. But there was love there too, a complicated and imperfect love, but a real one. With the market shut down and Celia gone, Ryan saw an opportunity to do something bigger. He didn't just want to punish the guilty. He wanted to transform the space that had been a symbol of exploitation into an example of dignity and social justice. He bought the property using his personal funds, not the company's, because this was deeply personal. He completely renovated it, hiring architects who specialized in community spaces, and turned it into a cooperative market where the vendors themselves were the owners. Each vendor received a stake in the business. He installed worker protection systems, fair, wages that guaranteed not just survival, but dignity, and benefits that included health and dental insurance and a daycare for the workers' children. He created an emergency fund to help those facing hardship, and he established clear rules. No one would be exploited there, ever again. And in the center of the market, where Celia's office used to be, he created a memorial with the names of all the stolen children and their mothers, so that no one would ever forget. It was a glass wall, engraved with 37 names, softly lit, a permanent reminder that injustice has a face and a name. Irene was invited to cut the ribbon at the grand reopening. She, who had been humiliated and exploited in that very place, now stood there as a symbol of resistance and hope. She wore a new dress that Mia had helped her pick out, simple but beautiful, and her hair was lovingly styled by her granddaughter. For the first time in decades, Irene felt beautiful. But more than that, she felt seen, acknowledged, valued. With Ryan by her side and Leo and Mia cheering, she cut the ribbon under the flash of cameras and the emotional applause of hundreds of people. Vendors cried, some hugged each other, others held up signs with messages of gratitude. It was more than the reopening of a market. It was the reopening of hopes that had been buried for so long. The market was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of dignity. The days following the reunion were intense and filled with conflicting emotions. Ryan had to process an avalanche of feelings that left him exhausted and, at the same time, more alive than he had ever felt. He had found his mother, his true origin, but Now he had to face the consequences of that discovery. And the first and most difficult conversation would be with Anthony and Martha Miller, the people who had raised him as their son. Ryan scheduled a dinner at his parents' house on a Friday. He arrived with a heavy heart, carrying envelopes with documents, photos, and the results of the DNA test he had done with Irene. The scientific confirmation only solidified what they both already knew in their hearts. They were mother and son. Anthony and Martha immediately sensed something was wrong. Ryan had never arrived with that look. On his face, that mixture of determination and pain. "Son, what happened?" Martha asked, her voice already trembling with worry. Ryan sat at the dining room table, the same place where he had grown up sharing meals, conversations, and family moments. He placed the envelopes on the polished wood and took a deep breath. "I need you to tell me the truth about my adoption. The whole truth." Anthony and Martha exchanged a look heavy with guilt and fear. They knew this day would come, they had always known. "Ryan," Anthony began, his voice deep and tired, "we love you. You know that. Everything we did was for love." "I know you love me," Ryan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But love doesn't justify lies. Love doesn't justify participating in a crime." Martha brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "We didn't know," she whispered. "I swear we didn't know it was illegal. They told us it was a legitimate adoption, that the biological mother had agreed to give up the child." Ryan opened one of the envelopes and spread documents across the table. "Then why is there no formal record? Why did you pay a huge sum of cash to intermediaries? Why did you never show me official documents?" The silence that followed was devastating. Anthony lowered his head, unable to meet his son's gaze. Martha cried silently, her hands trembling in her lap. "We wanted a child so badly," Anthony finally said, his voice broken. "We had tried for years, spent fortunes on treatments, and nothing worked. When they offered you to us, they said the bureaucracy would be faster if we did it a certain way. We questioned it, yes, but we were so desperate, so blinded by the desire to be parents that we accepted what they told us." Ryan felt tears burn his eyes. "You ripped a baby from his mother's arms, a poor, vulnerable, lonely woman. You told her her son was stillborn. Do you have any idea the pain you caused?" "We didn't know," Martha repeated, sobbing. "Please, believe us. If we had known, we never would have done it." Ryan wanted to believe. He desperately wanted to believe that the parents who had raised him with such affection were not monsters. And looking at them now, seeing the genuine pain on their faces, he realized they were victims too. Victims of their own desires, yes, but also of a system that exploited people's desperation, both the wealthy who wanted children and the poor whose children were stolen. "I found my biological mother," Ryan said, and saw the shock register on both their faces. "Her name is Irene. She's 68 years old. She has spent her entire life carrying the pain of losing her son. And when I saw her for the first time, being exploited and humiliated in a market, something inside me recognized her. My body knew before my mind did." Martha stood up, reaching for Ryan. "Are you going to leave us? Are you going to go?" Ryan looked at the woman who had rocked him when he had nightmares, who had cared for him when he was sick, who had celebrated every achievement as if it were her own. And he felt his heart break. "I'm not going to abandon you. You are my parents too. You raised me, you loved me, you gave me everything you could. But you need to understand that Irene is my mother too. She is the woman who gave me life, who suffered for me for 32 years. And I am going to be in her life from now on. I'm going to make up for all the lost time." Anthony stood up and hugged his son, crying openly. It was the first time Ryan had ever seen his father cry. "Forgive us, son. For God's sake, forgive us." Ryan returned the hug and Martha joined them. The three of them stood there, entwined in an embrace that was both a farewell and a new beginning. Something had been broken, but something new was also being born. A family rebuilt on truth, however painful it might be. Meanwhile, Patricia and her team worked tirelessly to gather all the evidence against the illegal adoption ring. The testimony of the nurse, Brenda Sullivan, was crucial. She brought records hidden for decades, pages with forged names, payment receipts, a complete network of corruption involving doctors, hospital staff, lawyers, and intermediaries. Celia Vance was at the center of it all. She had been one of the main operators of the scheme, receiving hefty commissions for every baby she helped divert. And when the scheme was uncovered and the hospital shut down, she had used the dirty money to buy the Keystone Terminal market, building her small empire of exploitation on the misery of others. Ryan authorized Patricia to hand over all the evidence to the district attorney's office. The operation was swift and efficient. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Celia Vance was arrested at her home. Television cameras captured the moment she was led out in handcuffs, her face red with rage and humiliation. The Keystone Terminal market was shut down for a full inspection. They found countless irregularities, exposed electrical wiring, a compromised structure, precarious sanitary conditions, non-existent employment contracts. The place was a time bomb waiting to go off. But Ryan didn't just want to destroy. He wanted to rebuild. He wanted to transform that space of oppression into a place of dignity and opportunity. He gathered all the market's vendors and workers for a meeting. Many were scared, thinking they would lose their livelihoods. But Ryan had a different plan. "I know you all depend on this place," he said, standing before dozens of tired and hopeful faces. "And I didn't come here to take that away from you. I came to offer something better. The Miller Group will invest in a complete renovation of the market. We will modernize the structure, ensure decent working conditions, and create fair contracts with proper wages. And most importantly, you will have a voice. There will be a workers' council that will participate in all major decisions." The initial silence gave way to murmurs, then to timid applause that grew into an ovation. For the first time in decades, these people felt they were not just disposable parts, but human beings with rights and dignity. Ryan created a special protection program for vulnerable workers, with priority for the elderly, and Irene was the first beneficiary. He didn't put her in a charity position, but in a real and respected role, quality control supervisor for the produce, utilizing all the experience she had gained over decades of working in the market. Along with the position came a decent salary, full health coverage for her and her grandchildren, and a new house in a housing development the Miller Group was building for its employees. It wasn't a mansion, but it was clean, safe, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a small yard where Irene could finally plant the flowers she had always dreamed of having. The first time Irene walked into the new house, she couldn't believe it. She walked through each room with tears streaming down her face, touching the walls as if she needed to confirm it was real. Leo and Mia ran through the rooms, choosing which would be theirs, laughing in a way they hadn't in years. "My son," Irene said, hugging Ryan, "I don't deserve all this." Ryan held his mother's face in his hands. "You deserve this, and so much more. You deserve every day of peace, every night of restful sleep, every moment of joy that was stolen from you. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you have it all." Leo approached, still processing all the changes that had happened in such a short time. "Uncle Ryan," he said, his voice hesitant, "can I ask you for something? Anything. I want to learn. I want to study, graduate, be someone in life. I don't want Grandma to ever have to worry about us again." Ryan smiled, proud of this nephew he barely knew, but already loved deeply. "You will study. Both of you will. I'll enroll you in a good school, and I'll make sure you have everything you need, and when the time comes, if you want, there's a place for you at the Miller Group, not as a favor, but as family that works and builds together." Mia hugged Ryan, and for the first time in her short life, she felt that the future was not a threat, but a promise. The months that followed were a time of profound transformation. The Keystone Terminal market reopened, completely renovated, with a modern structure, but retaining the charm and identity that made it special. The workers now had formal contracts, guaranteed rights, and a safe environment. Ryan divided his time between his business and the new family he had found. He had lunch with Irene at least 3 times a week, helped Leo with his math homework, and took Mia to see museums and parks she had never visited. And surprisingly, he managed to build a bridge between his 2 families. Anthony and Martha, after the initial shock, asked to meet Irene. The meeting was tense at first, fraught with guilt and hurt, but Irene, with the wisdom of someone who has suffered too much to hold a grudge, extended her hand. "You took care of my son when I couldn't," she said, her voice serene. "That doesn't erase the pain, but I also can't deny that you were good parents to him. Maybe we can build something new together." It wasn't easy or quick, but slowly the wounds began to heal. The two families learned to coexist, united by the love they all shared for Ryan. The story of Ryan and Irene made headlines. Newspapers, magazines, and television shows wanted to tell this story of an improbable reunion, of delayed justice, of a love that survived decades of separation. But more important than the fame was the real impact. The case reopened investigations into other illegal adoption rings. Dozens of families who had lived through similar pain found the courage to seek the truth. Some were reunited, others at least got answers. And the system that had allowed this for so long began to be dismantled piece by piece. A year after their first meeting at the market, Ryan organized a grand opening. It was a community center built next to the renovated market, offering vocational courses, free legal aid, psychological support, and activities for children and teens. There were computer labs, a community library, a space for crafts, cooking workshops, and even a small daycare, so that parents could work with peace of mind, knowing their children were safe and well cared for. It was a dream made real, a space where the community could grow, learn, and strengthen itself. The name chosen was a tribute, the Irene Santos Community Center. When Irene saw her name on the entrance plaque, she couldn't hold back her tears. A lifetime of invisibility, of being just one among the forgotten, and now her name was engraved there, in golden letters, representing hope and dignity for hundreds of people. It was the recognition of a story of resilience, of a woman who never fully bowed even when the world conspired to break her. At the opening ceremony, Ryan took the stage to give a speech. He looked out at the audience and saw his mother, Irene, sitting in the front row next to Leo and Mia. Behind them were Anthony and Martha, Patricia and her team, the market vendors, neighbors, friends, an entire community that had been transformed. "A year ago," Ryan began, his voice firm but emotional, "I walked into a market to close a business deal and found so much more. I found injustice, pain, and exploitation. But I also found courage, resilience, and love. I found my mother, I found my truth, and I learned that none of us can be truly free while others remain chained by poverty and oppression." He paused, looking directly at Irene. "This center is named after a woman who never gave up, who carried the weight of the world alone and yet maintained her kindness, her dignity, and her hope. My mother is proof that no matter how long it takes, the truth always finds its way, and love always wins." The applause erupted. Irene was crying, hugged by her grandchildren. Ryan stepped down from the stage and went straight to her, embracing her for a long time. Mother and son, finally together, finally at peace. That story began with pain, but ended with redemption. It didn't erase the suffering of the past, but it built a future where that suffering gained meaning, where exposed injustice became fuel for change, where love, even when stolen and hidden for decades, found its way back home. Ryan had found more than his origin. He had found his purpose, and Irene, after a lifetime of carrying impossible burdens, could finally rest her tired hands and feel the warmth of an embrace she had waited 32 years to receive. The market was reborn. The mother got her son back. The son found his roots. Injustice was punished. Abuse ended. And love, finally, won. Not through revenge, but through truth. Not for money, but for humanity. And in that embrace between mother and son, under the Philadelphia sky, was the proof that it's never too late for justice, never too late for love, and never too late to come home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ryan and Irene has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this long-awaited reunion, the fight for justice and the power of love that overcomes all barriers, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most on this journey. Was it the encounter at the market, the discovery of the truth, the final embrace between mother and son. Every day, we bring intense and transformative stories like this one, revealing the deepest and truest side of the human soul. Don't miss our next episodes. We'll be waiting for you here always, with more stories that will move you from beginning to end.